Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Us. I'm your host, Melanie Studley.
What's up, my friends? My name is Seth Studley. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and we are coming to you from Greenville, South Carolina, where we are spending some family time with my family on the East Coast, hence the different quality of recording, but you guys are going to like this show.
We are going to play an episode that I recorded with Stephen Murphy of the Nook podcast called Renewed in the Divine Order of Love. I wanted to air it on our show because it's such a good episode and it talks all about like the faith journey that I've been on and how it impacts marriages and the work that we do. So I wanted to share that here, but again, we forgot to bring our proper recording equipment, so we apologize for how this intro sounds, but the rest of the podcast is amazing. So here you go. Enjoy Renewed in the Divine Order of Love on the Nook podcast with Stephen Murphy.
All right, let's go.
Don't walk away from your divine gifting, your divine calling. God put it in you to help you be healthy. Don't ignore it. Don't walk away from it. Don't say, oh, that's not important. Listen to it. Work with it. Ignite it. Go with it. It's part of your gift from God.
Oh, dear listener, we have reached the summit. For 14 weeks, we have been talking about the importance of renewing our minds. And I hope that your faith and understanding have been stretched and challenged. This is the final installment of the Renew Your Mind series here on the Nook podcast. My name is Stephen, and it has been such an incredible honor to bring these stories and insights to you for the last few months. If you have missed any of these episodes, I highly recommend that you spin back through the library and catch up. Each one was so unique, and I would be hard-pressed to pick just one as my favorite. This is definitely a time when I value your feedback. What has God been saying to you through the words of my amazing guests? Is there something specific that has changed the way you think? Please send me those thoughts. My email address is stephen@nookpodcast.com, and I would love to hear from you. I always have that address in the show notes, along with links to the Nook Facebook page and my social media feeds for those who would like to follow along. Joining me on this big wrap-up show is one of my favorite people in the world. Melanie Studley is the other half of Seth Studley. He was on the podcast during the Personal Jesus series from a few months back, another show I highly recommend that you check out if you haven't already. I have a link in the show notes for that one to make it a little easier for you to find. Like Seth, Melanie went through a real crisis of faith after Mars Hill Church in Seattle, Washington closed down. She had been involved in worship ministry and was part of a really strong community of people. Sadly, when the church went under, so did all of what had become so important for her. After living somewhat untethered for a while, she started to sense just how much she needed Jesus. And without him, there wasn't much purpose in her life. There are many layers to this story, and I am glad that you are here for it. So settle in for this conversation with Melanie Studley. A really quick nutshell is that you two met, dated, married, started having the cheerins, and just shortly after your second son was born, your marriage imploded as Seth confessed to some bad things, and things went terribly south. Now, we know there's a whole lot more to it. Please go back and listen to those episodes. Out of that came what you guys have been doing now for several years. Based on that, I love what you've said so many times on your own show, is that you couldn't find the type of advice that you felt like you and Seth needed, the guidance, all those things that could help you get your marriage back on track. So it's kind of like, well, nobody's doing this, so I'll build one myself. Just from that aspect, we know we can see the beginning from the end. What did that look like as you two were healing and Anatomy of Marriage, Anatomy of Us were then born?
Oh, it was super messy. I mean, it was just such a messy process. And again, when we were going through it, if you don't know the story, at one point I gave Seth a black eye. He lied. He confessed. He did the right thing. He confessed to lying and looking at pornography when I had a tiny baby. I had a newborn and a 1-year-old at the time. And so as we went through that season of our life, it was just so hard. We for sure thought we were going to get a divorce. Everyone around us thought we were going to get a divorce. I gave Seth a black eye, like I mentioned. I was actually being like abusive to him, but I would have never known to frame it that way. Then I was just reacting. And unfortunately, my reaction was like a rabid raccoon or something. I just went crazy, just lost my mind, like literally. And so we went through that season, but we both decided like, no, we're not going to get a divorce, even though I hate you so much and I hate what our life has become. And I can't believe how messy it is all of a sudden. We're not going to get a divorce. We're going to do everything we can do to heal it. And so we slowly began the process of Seth actually, I think this was a divine thing. He started praying 6 times a day on his own accord. He would set prayer alarms. And I sometimes would not even talk to him. I wouldn't say thank you. I wouldn't say amen. I was just so angry. And so that was sort of like the first formative, season of changing and healing our marriage was this crazy mess. And as it got, as we tried to read all these books and listen to these podcasts, and podcasting was not super popular then, but watching videos and whatever, we just couldn't find someone who was like, yeah, but what do you do when you like hate them? Like, what do you do when you just don't even want to see their idiot face? So, like, how do you heal that? Because everything felt so tidy and clean and buttoned up and put together. And I'm like, but I'm not that. I'm not tidy and clean and buttoned up. And so the process of like how we went from healing our marriage to helping other people heal was really just like, wait, this isn't out there. Like, why aren't people talking about these things? Why have I never heard a story from a wife who gave her husband a black eye? Because I know I'm not the only one. Right. And so I was just determined, like against all the odds, for some reason, I think God just put it on my heart, like more like smack me upside the head with it, not put it on my, it wasn't like a gentle, it was like, do it. Right. And so I just have followed what God has called for us to do. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question at all, but that's how it felt.
You did. And I love the genesis of a story like that, because what attracted me to wanting to talk to you two in the first place was that, like you just said, you're not buttoned up, but it was obvious that the two of you were embracing the messiness of what you had been through, and something so good came out of it, because I truly believe from the first time I became aware of what you two were doing, it was that same idea of, I could recognize there's nobody approaching that aspect of marriages in turmoil with the approach that you guys were coming at it with. And I started thinking about that couple who's been married 4 or 5 years, and they're 29 years old now, and they got a couple of kids, and things are just coming apart at the seams. That the stuff that appealed to me back in the day, that's not the language that they speak. And so I so appreciated the aspect of your at times a bit gruff, but always so straightforward about how you guys were approaching it, because I just truly believed that was going to help some people. The side part of this, and I talked to Seth in his individual interview about how the whole Mars Hill thing plays a part in where the two of you are today. You were married, children, all those things, and then you were heavily involved at Mars Hill, especially at its peak. You were doing music. You were in it all. I mean, Seth was talking about how you guys would just be at church all day Sunday because you were neck deep in every bit of it. Give me just a little bit of a nutshell of what that season was like when things were good and you were just digging, doing what you did there.
Oh, it was an amazing season. I mean, it was, you were just surrounded. All of our friends were all from church. Like, we had almost no outside friends. which sounds silly to say. It almost sounds weird when I say it that way, but it was amazing. All of our friends,
Well, that's community.
all of our kids' friends were from, yeah, I mean, it really was like the definition of community. And now it sounds weird. Like people could be like, oh, that's culty. No, it's actually like community. It's great. It was amazing. Like we had, the church was really big, which meant you got to see a ton of amazing people every single Sunday. And we had gone there for 10 years, which means we had 10 years, a decade of creating friendships, having babies with like my friends all had kids around at the same time. So our babies were babies together and we were in the nursery together and we were serving together. And so when it was healthy and good and wasn't falling apart, it was truly our whole world. It really was. And I loved it. I would never have thought it would fall apart at all. And I didn't want it to fall apart. I just thought it was amazing and full of joy. I was singing, like I said, I was leading worship every Sunday with Dustin Kinsrew of the band Thrice. I mean, he's a literal famous musician and tours the world. And I was singing every Sunday with him, with these like top-notch musicians and praising God together and watching your friends get baptized. I mean, what's better than that? Not much.
Yeah. Well, for anyone who has listened to the rise and fall of Mars Hill, the emphasis on the word fall, everything did sadly just completely unravel. And from all I've ever known of you and Seth, it seems like it wasn't just, the church doesn't exist anymore. It really was, it trickled all the way down into how the two of you dealt with your own faith. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and again, when the church fell apart, it's like you don't have a framework for how to manage something like this because when the church fell apart, our entire community fell apart, but we didn't know it at the time because we kind of knew like, oh, well, so-and-so lives in this town over and maybe they live, because Mars Hill had a huge draw. So it drew people from all over the state, So that was part of the difficulty is that you weren't an actual physical community. You were a created community. And so when it fell apart, we lost every connection, but we thought we could maintain them, but without like a central reason to gather together, you can't, right?
That's good.
So we had no idea that like we would be losing our accountability partners. Even if we didn't call them accountability partners, we had them built into our community. So people who would kind of like, hey, I see that you're, I don't know, doing something that's maybe not healthy, or have you thought about this? Like you lose your sort of course correcting Christian buddies and you don't realize that you're losing them.
Yeah.
And so and then there's the bitterness factor, right? I think for Seth, it was different than it was for me and I say this a lot, but I became a Christian at 19. I didn't grow up like caring about Jesus or having a family that cared about Jesus. We grew up Catholic, but not like, we didn't really care. But we just didn't care. So when I became a Christian at 19, I lost all of my friends. I had I just had nothing. I had God. I had Jesus. I had the Bible and then Christian people that I knew around me, which Seth was one of them. And so I knew what it meant to like lose a thing to gain a faith, to gain my faith. I knew what that looked like. And I knew that my faith was important enough to lose all my friendships for, if that makes sense. Seth was raised Christian, didn't have a big conversion moment. You don't need to, but he didn't have that.
No.
So I think in a way it was like Christianity or faith was a little more like you could toss it out if you didn't really need it. It wasn't something that he like fought to get. You know what I mean? That makes sense.
Yep.
And so in that regard, our transition through losing Mars Hill and losing our church community was very different. I was like, we'll just find another one. Like we have to keep looking. Like this stuff matters. The community matter. Like we'll kind of scratch and claw to find something else. That's how I was looking at it. But Seth was just like double birds, mad at everything. And so what ended up happening, sort of compounding the fact that we no longer have community. We no longer have this like place to learn about our faith together that we had established for so many years. And then now we have no one to help us walk through the grief of losing our community. Right. So you just have this like complicating thing. And it felt to Seth, I think, like, why would God do this to us? And God is stupid and this is bad and Christians are dumb. And so he like turned it into a whole different thing. Now, I'm not saying I was great about it either. I mean, I was not. And I can be unkind and sassy and all of the things. But at the same time, I think I kind of thought like, oh, well, but we'll figure it out. Like, it'll be good. We'll get there. And we just had different ideas about it, I guess, and different experiences with it.
Yeah. But ultimately, you ended up in quite a dry season yourself. Like you just said, it was two different roads as far as how you and Seth both arrived there. But at the same time, few years later, it's like that's just a distant thing. And that's it's not really anything we're involved with anymore.
Yeah, you use a great word there. You said like a dry season, and that's the way that I would look at it. If I look at it retrospectively, like looking back at it, what I thought would happen was that Seth, and I'm just going to be really honest here, I thought Seth would take us to another church and kind of embed us into it. I thought that's what he would do, like as his role, because that's what he did at Mars Hill. So he was like the leader. We got connected into Mars Hill. It was always Seth at the forefront. I just went with it. I was like, oh, cool. These people are great. And here we are. And in my brain, I thought that'll just happen again. We'll just do that again at a new church, right? There's one across the street from us. We'll get embedded, whatever. I wasn't anticipating that Seth would struggle. So I didn't look out. I didn't look out for it. I didn't know to look like, oh, Seth might have a hard time with this. Like Seth might have a hard time trusting someone again. And I should be careful and thoughtful and respectful and loving and kind and helpful in that. I just didn't even think about that. And so what I do feel like happened was that I just didn't water that part of my life, the spiritual part of my life at all, just like shriveled up.
Yeah.
It just like became this barren landscape where I didn't hate it. I just didn't nurture it at all. Like did not take care of it at all. Now I will say, I was always taking in content, about the Bible and about God. So I didn't stop that part of it, but I definitely got into that dry season because I was not actively watering that part of my life.
After I had you guys on my show the first time, there was such a cool connection made between the three of us. And I remember you emailed me almost immediately after we got off the call. And you just said something like, hey, we just like meeting creative people. And that was a great conversation. And, you know, is there opportunities that maybe we could connect on stuff? And I was like, yeah. And we were back on a call the next day. You and Seth and I want to say we were on a call for like 2 hours or more, just swapping commonalities.
Yeah.
And from there, a great friendship was born. And I've come out to Seattle and helped you guys a couple of times. And I love how it was born, and I love what we have to this day. And because we've had this ongoing conversation about what do we do in content creation and new ideas and new methodologies. That's been a blast. So a little over a year ago, end of 2022, and I had just woke up with some amazing thing that I couldn't wait to tell you about. And I was a bit shocked by your answer in that you responded with something like, yeah, that's all really good and everything, but I just don't know where we're going with any of this right now. And it's hard for me to get excited about Anatomy of Marriage because I just feel like something is lacking so bad spiritually. And I don't know what to do with that. And I was like, wow, okay, well, that's a new twist. Could you give me some insight into what preceded that? What had you at that spot where you felt like, okay, suddenly none of this seems to matter because we're missing a big, big piece?
So this is going to sound unrelated, but we do coaching. We do high performance marriage coaching, right? We work with clients in the most, in the hardest parts of their marriage, couples going through the hardest things ever. And we work with them and we sit with them. And client after client after client, every single time we would find a solution for their problem, it almost always was like, oh, hey, this is like super biblical and very much Christian. Like the answer we're giving them is basically from the Bible. And why are we not just doing that? Like, why aren't we actually starting at the Bible? Why aren't we saying these things explicitly? Why aren't we saying out loud and on purpose, hey, the faith-based element of a marriage really matters? And we just weren't. And I think, again, too, there was church hurt going on. I also think, I think we went through about 9 months of spiritual attack, to be quite honest. As God opened up doors for me to do some really amazing things and start kind of kind of start the ball rolling in that this dream that I've always had. Like, I've had the opportunity to step into kind of the momentum that God has put there, and we just got attacked like crazy in that season. And I think what that looked like, I think what it looked like for Seth was almost like more pulling away, more second guessing, almost like doubling down on the doubt around faith, all of that kind of stuff. And then on my side, I think my spiritual attack was feeling absolutely hopeless. Yeah. I think I just was like, nothing matters. The podcast doesn't matter. What we're doing doesn't matter. Like it won't help anybody. I could cry about it just thinking about how I felt, because I know that it helps people. And it's the reason I met you. Our show is why we're friends. Mm-hmm. Our show is why, like, we have the best friends that we have right now, is because we were faithful to God's calling on our life, and we did it even when it was hard. And now he blessed us with friends. Mm-hmm. And so I know that in that season, I was being spiritually attacked very much in that way. Like, lose your hope, lose your faith in the process, lose all of that. And then Seth was equally being attacked of like, your wife is an idiot. She's so dumb. You're following her. You shouldn't be. And so that season was just so hard. But again, I kept going back to like, everything is pointing back to Jesus. Like, how come everything points back to Jesus? I just wanted it to point to something else.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Couldn't it be like exercise more or something? Or like eat no gluten?
Oh, my shoe is untied. That's an easy fix.
Right. It was like, it just was hard, but everything kept pointing back to doing things in a Christ-centered way. And then I want to say one last thing about it, that I heard this weird saying. I think it was Jordan Peterson was talking about the order of like the order of love, or the order of nature, or the order of the world, or something. He said something about the order of whatever. And the word popped into my head, the divine order of love. And it hit me like, again, God like went, boom, that's for you. Like a smack straight in the forehead, the divine order of love. And that was the other thing that made me go like, wait, the divine, like it's given to us by God. People say that like God is love. If I love you like Christ tells me to love you, then we're happy, then we're healthy. Oh my gosh, the divine order of love. And everything just kept coming back to Christ. And so that was a very weird way of answering your question, but that's what this season felt like, and how it just was so, we were being so polarized, but I kept having this like seed of, it's love, it's God's love, It's God's love. And so I'm like, okay, nothing else is making me happy. Nothing else is working. The therapist we go to is lovely, but it's not working. The things we do are great, but they're not helping enough. And the missing piece was Jesus. And once I figured out that the missing piece was Jesus, that's when I went, okay, let's go to Jesus for this.
Well, and that's where I loved the opportunity to hear Seth's side of it, because he calls what he went through a real Damascus Road kind of situation where he was just so far off the rails, and like so much of what you already said. And yeah, that's back in my history, but that's it. And how God just woke him up. And I love that it was happening at least somewhat concurrently with these reawakenings and shake off the dust kind of moments that you were having.
Yeah.
I know I said it to Seth. I can't remember if I said it to you, but what I had started to see in you guys was what I called 7/8. There was so much that was awesome about what you what you guys were doing, your approach, your follow through, even just down to some of the materials that you were coming up with, giving people stuff to put in their hands, do this workbook, make the commitment. Marriages are going to change. All of that was fantastic. That 8th that you didn't have was what you just said. And it almost makes sense that you would get to that point. You hit a wall that without Jesus, this thing is only going to go so far.
I love that. There's a lot about this that I really love, but I wish that at some real level, people could have seen how hard the behind the scenes element of it was, because at some point, and it's interesting because I've had people over the years tell me like, why aren't you doing your own thing? Why don't you do your own thing? Why don't you write books? Why don't you speak at whatever? And I could do those things. I could do things without my husband, but I feel very, very, very strongly that I am not supposed to.
Mm.
And I don't mean that in a weird, like, I could see a lot of people taking that out of context or being like, that's sexist. Oh, liberate women. I don't even know. But I know that God says you must do it together. You must do it together. And the requiring of us to do the work together requires us both to get closer to Christ in order to do the work together. And so, I mean, when I say we like just scratched and clawed and drew lines in the sand of like, I will, and I said this to Seth, I'm like, if you, and not in a threatening way, but like, we need to do this together. We need to be fully invested in the work that we're doing. And if we can't be, and if we can't do it with Christ and in this balanced way, I won't do it at all. I will not do this at all if it's not something that we're going to do that will bring us closer to God.
Yeah.
And to really intentionally say, this could be something we do for the next 20 years miserably and in an unhappy way and lying to people. We could pretend we have a great marriage, or we can actually dig in and do this at a real level that isn't pretend anywhere. We're not putting on a facade to make sure we look pretty. Like we show up real because God can do this work, but we have to work with God and it has to be done together. And I don't know that I'm hoping that helps someone. I'm hoping that it helps someone because there's a temptation as like a liberated woman and women can do anything. And I get it. But the thing is, and this is something I've wanted to mention earlier. I've been thinking about talking to you for the last couple of days, just thinking about what we might talk about and enjoying the idea of having this conversation and thinking about how in the self-help movement, in this sort of like in any spiritualized thing that doesn't have Christ at the center, it tends to pull people away from one another. So yeah, I could be liberated and write my own books and do things without Seth and travel. I have, right? But guess what happens? Without the centering of Christ, we start to separate. Seth and I don't grow stronger together. We grow farther apart, right? And so there's just so much to say for, I guess what I wish people could see was what it took for us to even get to this point of like unity. I mean, it's like fighting for unity, really, like just tooth and nail, even fighting against my family for unity. Man, we could talk about that for 1,000 years. But anyway.
I love what you said there because what I hear is at that point when everything shifted, you then are working out of an overflow of those scratching and clawing times of commitment, of saying that it's this way or it's no way.
Yes.
Because from when you are completely in it together and you're drawing from that same place, you're drawing from Christ, then you're being filled. And how much more are you going to be able to do? How much more influence are you going to have on people, on marriages? Because I know that's the sweet spot for you guys.
Yeah.
How much more opportunity are you going to have to speak into marriages when you are properly centered and speaking from that absolute middle and not just, we're just going to keep throwing rocks at this until something breaks. It makes so much more sense the way that you basically, almost started over.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And it changed absolutely the way we see one another, the way we see Christ through one another. I think that's one of my favorite parts about it is it's totally transformed our marriage. And we've been married for almost 20 years, right? So, and this is just this year. So it's amazing to watch and it's so life-giving, but also a challenge. Here's something I really want to make sure that I say is that alongside this process kind of happening at the same time, I was also digging into the side of our faith that most Sunday services don't talk about, which is really like the warfare side. Like you're in a war, like we are in a battle, like we're in a battle. It's good against evil, like for real. And so what I've discovered is that it's almost like we're, this is going to sound so stupid. Have you ever seen the Braveheart?
Oh, yes.
The movie Braveheart. Have you seen the scene where the actors in the back aren't actually fighting? It's like a bloop, you know what I'm talking about, right?
It's an Easter egg.
So that to me feels like, like Sunday service feels a lot like that. Like, like you're pretend fighting,
Yeah.
right?
Well, you're sword
But-
fighting with the tube that the Christmas wrapping comes on.
Yeah. And that to me felt like what I thought of church for a really long time, and what I thought of my faith was this, like, I don't know, it's like kind of important, but take it or leave it.
Right.
I don't know. But then over the last year, I've been really, and I think a lot of it too had to do with my brother's death and lots of different things. But really realizing like, oh, this is an all out war. And if I'm not on my game, my A game, and I come and if my knife's not sharp and I'm not ready to like take someone down, my marriage will be taken down. My kids will be taken down. My livelihood, my life, my friendships, my church, right? So I had this big shift of like, let me be really serious about this. Let me get up in your face about this, because this is a war. It's a battle that we're in. It's not just like, I don't know, go to church and have some, get a mint.
Right.
So they hand out mints at the church, and it's like, it's not that. And so that was another huge shift where I realized I'm like, the devil could keep us small so easily. The devil could just keep you little.
Yep.
Don't really share the story. Don't really talk about Jesus. And I got mad. And I was like, no, we're doing this. We're doing this
That's
all
awesome.
the way, and we're going to do it together. And I felt like, poor Seth, I just dragged that man through the mud, but he sticks in there with me.
Well, with all
It's
that
spiritual mud, it worked.
Oh, yes. Well, but that's how you know it's worth it.
Right.
That you walk out with a little bit bruised every now and then.
Right.
You guys had built a pretty decent following, whether that was just the casual podcast listeners or people that had taken those steps to actually say, we want to do some stuff with you. Did you get any guff when you guys did make that big turn where people were just like, hey, maybe dial it back on the whole Jesus thing? That's a little bit more than we were.
You want to know the
bargaining
worst
for.
part of all is that the only people who have ever said anything unkind to us are people very close to us. Yeah. Like
That's
people
brutal.
who you go, oh, that really hurts. Like you're saying this thing and that. Like I mean, it's not easy to say anything countercultural in cancel culture right now.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's not easy to say anything about this stuff. And then to have the people that you think maybe would just not say anything at all, that's okay.
Right.
But to have them be like, oh, you're just doing that for likes. I'm like, oh, God. Yeah, right. Because everybody loves Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
The internet just loves Jesus.
They come flocking for that.
So that's been a hard one to have family and friends say weird things to you about it, like as if we were doing it to be popular, which is like, this is the last thing. This is not making us popular.
Yeah.
Be very clear.
Well, at the risk of churching it up, is that almost its own confirmation? I mean, I wouldn't wish those harsh words on you, but the scripture says you will be hated because of me. And that's not a verse you ever see embroidered on a pillow.
We should start a new trend.
You think?
Yeah.
Popularize the verses that people go, no. That in and of itself also becomes a part of that warfare that you were just talking about.
Yeah. And I think what's hard for me, not hard, but the people saying these things do not bear fruit that I care to eat. That makes sense. So it's not like someone was saying this that was living a life that I admire and respect. And so that for me was another, but yes, to what you were saying, it was like, oh, well, there it is. There's that thing that the Bible says that will happen when you speak out and in favor of Christ, people will mock you. It's happening. So that was number one. But then number two was like, and the people who are mocking me, if I sit down long enough and just look at their life, I don't want that anyway. And so in a way, it was like this double confirmation of like, I can't focus my energy on that, because that to me feels like part of the trap. That's the trap that the devil sets for me,
Well, and
it's baited with people that I love.
Yeah. But even in that, it helps you maybe even define your own borders, your own guard all the more, because that's not anything I'm after anyway. So that's just another way that I can go, not going there. And I'm on a focused thing here, and I'm not going to let something like that distract me.
Yeah. And I call it, it's funny. I use this language. It's my straight and narrow. Like I define, and I say when I define it, that's not exactly true. That is a biblical concept, the straight and narrow path. But most people never take the time to say, what is my straight and narrow path? So I came up with this idea for clients because with a marriage, you need to have a very clearly defined straight and narrow path. I'm going to use, I'll use a funny example here, but like on your straight and narrow path, I don't think heroin is a part of it. I don't think like
that's a bad
intense
idea.
drug abuse will help you. Yeah, that makes your path real broad and it does not keep you on that hyper-focused straight and narrow path. And so part of, again, when we started having people, again, people we love, the people closest to us, say things and kind of mock us or say we're doing it for some weird attention thing. I had to remind myself, I'm like, you know, on the straight and narrow path of my life that I am trying to create where Christ is actually at the end of it, being mean and mad about this person's behavior is not on there. So I'm just going to ignore it. I'm like, there's nothing I can do. But actually, in fact, loving this person, regardless of how they treat me, is on that straight and narrow path. So I guess I have to choose that one.
Yeah.
You know?
While it's incredibly obvious, or I feel like it's incredibly obvious, everything about what you and Seth have been through in the last year just screams renewing the mind. You don't come to those decisions. You don't come to those moments of just abandon and surrender without at least the initial understanding, and an understanding that I assume is continuing to grow, that constant need for renewal, that constant need to look again at the plan, look again at that straight and narrow to say, no. This distracted me. Nope, that seemed like a really big deal, but that's yesterday. This stays true. Talk to me a little bit about that daily, and I know for me, and I've said it many times throughout this series, how at times it's hourly.
I love that you brought that up because it gives me an opportunity to talk about how I've created systems for that. Like I am super ADD. I'm dyslexic. I can't remember what I did 8 minutes ago, let alone what I should do 8 years from now. Like I can't think that way. I don't think that way. But I do know that Christ requires it's a daily thing. It's like you said, sometimes it's minute by minute to be like, what is that straight and narrow? Oh my gosh, did I fall off of it? What am I like? How do I direct my life? Ugh, who's doing it with me? No one's helping me do this, right? And and so what I ended up doing, and you're gonna laugh at this, but this is my it has an ugly banner across it right now because it's a proof from Amazon. But I'm working on making a prayer planner and journal. This is really how I live my life, and I can't not have. So I'll tell you what is in there. So the first thing is your prayer that day. Then you have gratitude. Then you have a time tracker. Then you have mood tracker, habit tracker to let me read you the habits. Okay. Get sunlight, 25 minutes of exercise, worship music, laugh, do your love language with your partner, talk with a friend, family time, meal prep, pray. Then on here is what's my vision, right? Next to it says inspiration and affirmations. Next to that, it says thoughts that keep me stuck and thoughts that move me forward. Like this is how I live my life because I couldn't figure out how to remember all the things I was supposed to remember to follow that straight and narrow path. I just couldn't. I'm like, how do other people keep this in their brain? Because I cannot.
Right.
And so I had to create, and I have little cards that I carry around in my pocket, like little wallet sized, cut down 3x5 cards, like they're half of a 3x5 card. And I'll just write reminders to myself about where I need to be spiritually to get where I want to be in my life. And really, so many people don't take the time to sit down. If you don't have a goal that you're aiming for, what's the path that you're on?
Right.
You're just wandering aimlessly, right? Without a what is it? Without a vision, the people perish.
Yes.
Right. We need to have a vision. Set 20 minutes aside and sit down and think about, how do I want to live my life? How do I want to feel and look and think and have experience when I'm 97? Right. My grandmother-in-law is 97 years old. What pictures do I want on my wall? How do I want to have my relationship with my kids? Like, what do I want to be like with Seth when he's 99? Right? Or he's way older than that. He'd be 100 and something if I was 97. But
he's way older.
He's way older than that. But like, just sitting long enough to be like, if there's a straight and narrow, what does it lead to? And you can't have your straight and narrow unless you know where you're trying to go and all of those things. And so for me, it was really defining what that, and I'm going to share it with you because it's hilarious, but it's perfect. My vision, and I've written this down every single day since I created this planner. My vision is to live in a barn. Okay. I'm going to build a barn house, raise puppies, raise dogs. That's the two. These are things I do that are life-giving. Help couples and individuals through resources and lead them to Christ. That is my vision. And I write it down in some variation of that form every single morning in my planner. I think about it every day, at least once when I write it down. And then I write inspirations and affirmations to remind myself to do that thing. Why does it matter for me to do that thing, right?
Yeah.
And again, I know this is a very long-winded answer to your question, but this to me feels like this is what people are missing. I can want to love Jesus all day long, but if I have no pathway to get there and I have no structure and I can't remember it and no one around me loves Jesus, I mean, listen, when I became a Christian, no one in my family, and they all mocked God. Like everybody literally in my family just was like, this is a joke.
Oh, wow.
How am I supposed to find my way when my entire family, whom I love, thinks what I'm searching for is a joke?
Yeah.
Right? Buy my planner in. Just kidding.
Well, that's not that I feel that this needs some odd disclaimer. I haven't talked to you in a little bit, which is also part of why I was looking forward to having this discussion, is that I didn't even know that you were working on that. But I love that that's the way your brain works. And I would even say that whether people want your planner or not, you've got a fantastic thing going there. That and I just harped on this a couple of weeks ago on this show, just for people need a physical Bible.
Yes,
there's just something so important about the page. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to quantify that the way I feel about it in my own head, but the ability to write something down like that, how much more impact that has on you. This is now mental stuff at that point. And then writing stuff down. One of the fun things that Melanie and I have in common, and it's something that we've joked about for a couple of years now, is our love of Post-its. And while we joke about it, my use of these things, I'm like you, that I don't know where my brain would be without the ability to scratch something down really quick and stick it somewhere where I can remember it. And it's all in that same modality. Write it down, write it down, write it down. And it's going to give it that much more ability to stick. See what I did there?
Yes. We can systematize these things. Just people haven't. That's all. I mean, we can systematize success in relationships. And I'm going to hold up the Power Couple Planner, right? Like, this is one of my first amazing things that I created. And the only purpose for it is to systematize and remind couples of their goal to have a healthy, happy marriage. That's not that hard to do, but nobody does it because it sounds boring. But guess what? It's the boring stuff that yields
matters.
Fruit, and that matters. Yes. I mean, think of like gardening is incredibly boring. Harvesting wheat is incredibly boring. Everybody likes the bread, but they don't want to go harvest the grain, right? Like, it's the boring stuff that is the foundation of most of our healthiest, best things in life. And so, as I was thinking about, like, you know, having to write something down every day, or reading a piece of paper like that has words on it, right? There's something ingrained. You know, they talk about in the Bible that God spoke the word. So the word is, what the verse is. I can't think of what it is. It talks about God speaking, and that created things. So words really, 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 really matter. Like, way more than we give them credit for, because we hear so many in a day, and some words are terrible and some words are used to hurt people, but words are so powerful. Yeah. And you figure out after the practice of writing down, let's just say, your vision every single day, or the things that keep you stuck, thoughts that keep you stuck, you start writing it down and forcing yourself to write it down. You begin to understand and feel them way differently than even if you just thought them or said them. Right. And there's something about the act of, like, I don't know if it's just like you're dedicating physical movement to writing out, like, I'll just read some of mine. I think it's kind of interesting to do, like thoughts that keep me stuck. One of the thoughts that keeps me stuck, I think it perpetually is, it's too hard. It's too hard to do what I want to do. Okay, that's the thought that keeps me stuck.
I'm sorry. Who listening to this right now cannot fully admit to that?
Right?
And it's there, but we don't acknowledge it. So if I don't acknowledge it, then it's not that big a deal.
Yep. And then guess what? Right next to it is the box that says thoughts that set me free. And here's what it says next to it's too hard. I wrote nope in all caps, which is my favorite thing to do. I write nope and then I underline it. And then I wrote thoughts that set me free. I just need to apply myself and do it. So I get to tell myself, like I get to say the thing that gets in my way and then the thing that sets me free right next to each other. And what's so cool about this practice of having to write it every single morning at like 5:30 in the morning, I sit down with my cup of coffee and I go, okay, what thought is keeping me stuck today? And I have to identify it. And then I have to identify the opposite. What thought sets me free? Same thing with my vision. Same thing, like if you did this with a marriage vision or anything, you become more granular because you're repeating the process. And it makes me think of what the Bible talks about, like meditate on my word daily.
Yes.
Like think about it over and over. And I love Joyce Meyer's, like her example of meditation, just like rolling a thought over and over and over again. And it's like, okay, if we're supposed to like meditate on God's word, we're supposed to do what God calls us to do. We're supposed to live this life. Why wouldn't we meditate on all of these things and roll them over, the positive things,
right,
the Christ-centered things, the vision? And when I have a vision, it's what God has called me to do. And let's meditate on it and think about it and repeat it every single day. So I don't know. All of that to say I like sticky notes too.
So much of what you're talking about seems to lay right into take every thought captive.
Yes.
So much of this is about your thinking.
Yeah. I know. Now I have to show you my knuckles because that's what my tattoos are about. It's Thessalonians, right? So let me take my rings off. My gaudy jewelry. So it's the examine everything. Hold fast to that which is good. And that to me is like, that's it. We need to be able to examine everything. Examine what we believe about the church that fell apart. Examine what we believe about our marriage or our kids or our life or God or whatever. And hold fast to that which is good. And God is good.
Yeah. Well, and even in what you're saying right there, that's that reminder that you can't just look at what's on the surface. Because on the surface, you just had a big old pile of church hurt. But it's going to take work to take apart all those bricks that caved in for you to find that still underneath that is that, does your faith really have anything to do with Mars Hill Church?
Yeah. I mean, no, it was an amazing place to have expressed my faith.
Right.
Loved it. It was great. But no, at the end of the day, I didn't need Mars Hill ever.
Right.
And,
and it can't become an excuse at that point that you just like, well, I'm excused for the rest of my life because Mark Driscoll really ticked me off.
Right. And that's what I was going to say, actually, right at the very beginning where you were talking about Seth and I being so authentic and raw with our marriage stuff and how we talk about things and our experience with the church. Because what I kept seeing was this pattern of someone gets hurt and then they stay hurt and then they embrace that spot and then they become this like just this brash and all of a sudden it just becomes this abrasive, but that's me. That's who I am because I've been through and they
build a platform
identity
on it.
Yes, they make their identity this thing that happened to them, but they're calling it something else. Oh, I'm just this, I'm just whatever. And it's like, well, no, let's go way deeper than that.
Yes.
Let's have our identity be in Christ, regardless of what the church around us is doing, regardless of what our friends are doing. Our identity is in Christ, not these other things, right? And that's really hard to do, especially when not many people are talking about how that works, what it feels like, what it looks like. Because it's a process, a hard process.
Yes. Well, and with that, the process, there's no way I don't think that any of us could ever say, well, the process began here. That I think the more that you become aware of these things, the more that you define that straight and narrow. I love the way you said that. The more that you're able to dive deep into what that straight and narrow is, that the understanding becomes that much more clear on, well, this wasn't just from the time I punched Seth in the face. No, it went back about another 5. No, it wasn't 5 years. Actually, it was, you start seeing how who you are is built from a long time ago. But the way that things are going to change, the way that things are going to have purpose is the way that you renew your mind every day, the way that you remind yourself of all that you have now learned about who Jesus is, about how he wants us to live in his amazing grace, his amazing mercy, and how what comes out of that. Again, I'll have to go back to how exciting it has been for me to watch you and Seth go through. And I'm sure that even though you've talked about how difficult it was, I'd like to think that you probably also understood that it was necessary to get you to where you are.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's helped define who you are in the right now. And
yeah. And listen, it's where God put us.
Yes.
It's where God put us. That's where we are. If this is where we are, God wants us here.
I am so grateful that the friendship was born when it was, because I don't know, I just saw so much in there that was going to be good.
Yeah. Well, and something that I want to point out in the last bit of what you said is like, in this process, what the goal is, I believe, is that we all begin to think more sort of expanded and more divinely about ourselves. And I don't mean that we are divine, but that we're connected to divine, right?
Yes.
And in a way, as you said, this process mattered to our refinement. This is the heat of the refining fire. And what this last year has taught me is like, hey, Mel, stop telling God to turn the furnace down if you want to be refined. That's what I was doing. Like, just don't make it hard.
Dude.
Don't make it hard. Right? And it's like, hey.
Now you're talking to some people.
Right. If you want a weapon that will do anything in this war that we are in, you must be refined and do something mighty with me, but don't make me uncomfortable. Like, what a joke. I was living in a joke. You cannot have those two worlds. You cannot have comfort and conquering. You can't. They don't go hand in hand, right? And so in order to be effective for the kingdom of Christ, you have to be uncomfortable. You have to be pushed. You have to push yourself. You have to know what you're being pushed. You have to go after it. And to be refined, you must suffer the heat of the refining fire. And people don't talk about that enough because it doesn't make you want to clap.
No.
It makes you want to cry.
Yeah.
Right? It makes you go, wait, what's the refining fire? I don't know.
Why
if
would I
want
bother?
That, right? Why would I bother? And one thing I want to say to you specifically is that I've started using this language with the people God puts in my life is that you, Stephen, have been a provision from Christ to Seth and I. God provided you for us. And I don't mean that in a airy-fairy, fluffy, light way. I mean, God went, oh man, I know who can help them. It's this guy who lives in somewhere. Who knows? Missouri, something like that. Got it. Nailed it. He lives in St. Louis. But that is one of the coolest ways that I remember saying this. I went to a women's event and I remember using that language. And I think it was on accident that I said that these people were like my provision from God. And I was like, wait a second, God provides people. And it just like blew my mind to think that God put people. Now, here's where it gets real meta. God put people into our life to help us walk through a season. But the only reason God put these people in our life is because we were faithful to him to make the podcast.
Right.
Right. It's this reciprocal, beautiful, amazing, like, hey, God calls us to do this thing. We do this thing. We are blessed by the people that we met because we did this thing. And we continue. And this to me is the divine order of love. This is the reciprocal nature of Christ. He will bring you who you need when you need them. Right? But only if you take the steps toward them. It's just this amazing, life-giving thing. And I wish, man, do I wish I could just lock arms with everybody and bring them with me. Like, come on. This side of faith is so good. This side of faith is so vibrant and life-giving. And so many people never even know it's there.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and the beauty of that is that when you walk in that gifting, no matter what it is, no matter how obscure you may think it is, when you are living from that sweet spot, then it becomes good for somebody else.
But I mean, I think I will just say a call to people who are listening to this show. And thank you for doing this show, by the way. I just think it's amazing. And I love your work and I love how you see things. And you are really such a blessing. I'm going to cry. I don't think you can know how impactful your presence is in my life and the life of my kids and with Seth. Like, I don't know how you would know the impact of that, but I'm just really thankful for what you do and how you've stepped out in faith and how you follow what God calls you to do. That's amazing to watch and witness, and I'm privileged to be your friend. And I just want to say, like, to call out to listeners, like, look for what God is calling you to do. It is the best thing for you. It is the divine order of love, the thing that makes your heart come alive and sing, and you know that it like harmonizes and falls in place with what God has for you. Keep searching for it, because when you search for it, that's where your happiness lies. That's where it is. As odd as it sounds, I raise dogs because it makes me really happy and it makes other people really happy, and it's a part of my divine plan. And I'm not even kidding. It's raising dogs, for Pete's sake, doesn't seem very important, but it is, right? It could be gardening. It could be parenting. It could be writing. It could be singing. It could be welding. It could be anything, but don't pretend that God didn't put that into you. But God put it in you to help you be healthy. Don't ignore it. Don't walk away from it. Don't say, oh, that's not important. Listen to it. Work with it, ignite it, go with it. It's part of your gift from God.
Not sure how I'm supposed to wax terrific about all that was said in this discussion. Perhaps the best thing to do is say how much I admire Melanie's passion for God and the work that she and Seth are doing in helping couples do that hard work of course correction in their marriages. If you'd like information on anything we talked about today, check for the links down in the show notes.
All right, guys, we hope you loved that episode. I know I certainly did. And if you want to find out more about the Nook podcast, just look it up on all the places that you find podcasts. Steven is awesome. He's one of our great friends, and I loved this episode.
Yeah, check it out. I hope you took some notes, too. I even did myself, listening to my own wife talk about the divine order of love and how it just makes sense, guys. And if you actually apply it, it can change your life. So go check it out. And if you have any questions or any kind of comments, hit us up on Instagram, of course. And always remember to email us at hello@anatomyofus.com. So talk to you guys later.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.